Hello everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar where we'll offer a short briefing on the 2019 TCFD Second Status Report. During this briefing, you will gain insight into the current state of climate-related financial disclosures and what it means for corporate reporting moving forward. We encourage everyone to participate and submit your questions using the chat function on the right-hand side. We also aim to be as efficient as possible and hopefully keep this webinar to 30 minutes. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters. Firstly, Nadine Robinson, who is the Technical Director here at CDSB. She leads our technical work programme, including activities relating to TCFD disclosures and making corporate reporting fit for purpose. We also have Michael Zimoni, who is the Policy and External Affairs Manager here at CDSB. He focuses on policy and corporate engagement globally and oversees our external affairs activities. So safe to say you're in very capable hands. And now with that, I would like to pass you over to Michael, where he will kick off the briefing.
Thank you very much, Leslie, and thank you to all of you for joining today. I just wanted to kick off by introducing you to CDSB, the Climate Disclosure Standards Board. We are an NGO consisting of a board of 9 business and environmental organizations. We were founded in 2007 at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos, and we are chaired by the World Economic Forum, and you can see our board members on the screen. We are also kindly supported by a technical working group of over 40 experts, and you can see a list of an example of some of our board members on the screen. Our mission is to provide decision-useful environmental and climate change information to markets via the mainstream corporate report, that is the annual report of companies. And with this short introduction, I'll hand over now to Nadine.
Good morning. So to begin with, we just wanted to share with you a little bit about the CDSB framework for reporting environmental information and natural capital information in the mainstream report. And our CDSB framework has 7 guiding principles, which are basically the how of what to report, of how to report in your mainstream report or annual report. And they include things like that information should be faithfully represented, it should be consistent and comparable. So that contains a number of principles, and it also includes 12 reporting requirements, which are listed on the screen there, which relate everything from specific content requirements of what to report in the mainstream report related to governance and the reporting period, etc. Now, both of these are fully aligned with the TCFD recommendations in the TCFD's final report of 2017, and they're also complementary and meant to work alongside existing reporting provisions of other framework and standard setters, including CDP, GRI, SASB, and also existing regulations globally. Moreover, the CDSB framework is referenced in the European Union's non-financial reporting directive guidance and in at least 5 stock exchanges globally. So now if I could turn specifically to the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. To get started, we thought it might be useful for some of you who are new to the TCFD, and also a recap for others, to just remind you of how the TCFD came about and what it aims to achieve. So it has its origins in the G20's Financial Stability Board, which was established in December 2015. Now, they have produced 2 status reports, and this is obviously the second status report we're looking at today, which highlight the results of implementation to date. The TCFD acknowledges that in most G20 jurisdictions, there are existing legal obligations to disclose material climate risks in financial reports. So, and the TCFD has built on existing frameworks and standards like ours and some of the others I've mentioned in the previous slide, and other requirements. So the TCFD is really seen as a unifier, and for many it is the gold standard for making universally applicable climate-related financial disclosures. So the TCFD has been instrumental in helping to galvanize the political will globally to bring climate-related disclosures into the mainstream and also into the boardroom and on-board agendas. And so as you see, we have Mark Carney in the image on the slide there, and he has says in the future disclosure will move into mainstream. It is more reasonable to expect that authorities will mandate it. So we just wanted to sort of frame our discussion today in that context. And also Michael Bloomberg reminds us that increasing transparency makes markets more efficient and economies more stable and resilient. So if I turn to the next slide now, let's look at exactly what the 2019 status report is and what it's telling us. So just to highlight two things here, with the release of the second status report, the TCFD at the same time has its TCFD Supporters initiative, and currently there are 792 supporters globally with a market capitalization of over 9.3 trillion. In the list of supporters, we see that approximately half of all supporters are from the financial sector. This is followed by the non-financial sector, where we have 297 supporters from the non-financial sector. And then finally, there's another category which relates to governments and business and professional associations, which is at 114. So the map on the slide in front of you shows the geographic distribution of survey respondents. So one of the things that the task force did in its second status report is it looked at sent a survey out to over 3,000 companies and organizations and had 485 respondents. And we see that the bulk of respondents came from Europe at 45%. And it's also interesting to note that the US ranks #1 in terms of the number of country respondents, followed by the UK and Japan. So what else was reviewed? So to better understand climate-related financial disclosures and how they have evolved, the task force reviewed, using artificial intelligence technology, reports of over 1,100 large companies in 142 countries spanning 8 industries. And they looked at these reports over a 3-year period, so looking at the financial years covering 2016, 2017, and 2018. In addition, the task force conducted a survey of, as I mentioned in the previous slide, of companies' efforts to implement the TCFD recommendations. And they also looked at the user's perspective on the decision usefulness of climate-related financial disclosures. They considered, it's fairly important to note that they considered both the views of the users and those preparing these climate financial-related disclosures. And the most useful elements from users' perspectives, according to the second status report, related to the governance framework and to the identification of relevant goals and targets. So if I move on to the next slide now, this is basically why did they do a second status report. So the task force identified or gave 3 reasons for preparing and releasing a second status report. So the objectives of this report are first to provide an overview of current disclosure practices as they relate to the task force recommendations. So basically it's assessing the state of play. The second point was looking at they wanted to highlight the key challenges associated with implementing the 11 recommended disclosures to date. And thirdly, they also wanted to outline some of the efforts the task force will consider undertaking in the coming months to help address some of these implementation challenges or impediments that have been identified to date. And we will touch on these towards the end of the webinar. So now if I could just turn to Mike, who will highlight some of the key themes from the second status report.
Thank you, Nadine. And just before I do that, I also wanted to flag up that we will be taking questions at the end, and we actually can see some questions already coming in. But if you'd like to ask any questions, please use the chat function or the Q&A function on the right-hand side of your screen. So now onto the key themes. The 2019 status report tells us that despite support for the TCFD rising by more than half since last September, companies are still finding it a bit of a challenge to implement the recommendations, which results in insufficient disclosure for investors. More clarity is needed on the potential financial impact of climate-related issues, and the majority of companies do not disclose information on resilience. And finally, mainstreaming climate-related issues requires the involvement of multiple functions. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So what does this tell us? What do these key themes tell us? From this, we can conclude that we have a globally agreed framework, but companies are not yet using it. Partial disclosures are the norm, and but we do see an increase on when the number of companies using the annual report to report this information. Over to you, Nadine.
Thank you, Mike. So I just wanted to, at this point, to cover two sort of key areas in terms of to provide an overview of the contents of the 2019 status report. One relates obviously to the level of disclosure, so how many companies are disclosing, and the second one relates to the location of disclosure, so where are they disclosing. And finally, we'll wrap up by analyzing what this means for reporting moving forward and the commitment from the task force in helping to overcome some of the challenges identified in implementation to date. So some of the most concerning takeaways from the report show that while the percentage of companies disclosing climate-related information has increased, that overall it remains low. So basically, more progress is needed in disclosure. And the lowest percentages of disclosures relate to strategy and scenario analysis. So let's look at the statistics on progress. The report shows that 78% of companies disclosed information aligned with at least one recommended disclosure, and only 25% aligned with more than 5. So what this means is that only 4% of companies disclosed information aligned with at least 10 of the 11 recommended disclosures. So very few companies globally are adhering to the TCFD framework. That said, we also need to look at where we are in the implementation path, and that we are in the second year of reporting under the TCFD. So we expect that those figures will change as there's greater adoption at scale. Now, the Artificial Intelligence Review found that the number of 11 recommended disclosures only grew by an average of 0.8 from 2.8 in 2016 to 3.1 of 11 in 2017. And so in 2018, we had 3.6 of 11 recommended disclosures being made on average by companies. None of the recommended disclosures are over 50%, even for governance and risk management. This is both significant and somewhat disappointing given the task force recommends all companies disclose governance and risk management, even if they don't deem climate-related information to be material. In fact, the recommended disclosures related to governance and risk management have the lowest percentages of disclosures, with the exception of strategy C disclosure related to the resilience of the organizational strategy. So what's causing this? Well, some preparers who took part in the survey stated in the second status report, they noted the challenges disclosing information related to these recommendations because climate-related issues are integrated into company-wide governance and risk management processes, making separate disclosures unnecessary. We believe that integrating climate into existing business processes, including enterprise risk management, is crucial, and this should not be seen as a negative. Now let's explore the findings specifically on strategy C, on the organizational strategy, the resilience of the organizational strategy, and using scenario analysis as the tool to help assess this resilience. So the AI review found that the lowest percentage of disclosures aligned with strategy C, and that was consistent across all 3 years reviewed. While the percentage of companies disclosing increased between 2016 and 2018, only 9% of companies, so that's 1 in 10 companies in 2018, disclosed information on strategy resilience. And this is only a small increase of 3% from 2016. As noted in response to the 2018 TCFD survey, companies have found this recommended disclosure to be one of the most challenging to implement. So then if I turn to the second aspect so we've talked a little bit about the level of disclosures, and now we're going to look at where these disclosures are being made. So before we dive into the location of disclosures, it's important to remind ourselves of what the task force recommends about where these disclosures should be made. So the TCFD recommends that preparers of climate-related financial disclosures should provide such disclosures in their mainstream, i.e. public annual financial filings. In most G20 jurisdictions, companies with public debt or equity have a legal obligation to disclose material information in their financial filings, including material climate-related information. The task force believes climate-related issues are or could be material for many companies. So next, the task force recommends that companies should make financial disclosures in accordance with their national disclosure requirements. In the event that this is not possible, for example, in Japan, the Yuka Shoken Hokokusho is the mandatory mainstream financial report that has a structured format. The the task force encourages companies to disclose those elements in other official company reports that are at least issued annually, widely distributed, and available to investors and others, and subject to internal governance processes that are the same or substantially similar to those used for financial reporting. And this is reinforced in the second status report as stated in the original TCFD final report. This leads us to the next point, that climate-related financial disclosures should be subject to appropriate internal governance processes. Since these disclosures should be included in annual financial filings, the governance processes should, according to the task force, be similar to those used for existing financial reporting. They would likely involve review by the Chief Financial Officer and Audit Committee as appropriate. Finally, asset managers and asset owners should use their existing means of financial reporting to their clients and beneficiaries where relevant and feasible. So then, looking specifically at the location of the recommended disclosures, you will see figure 55 drawn from the second status report. So the first three, and each of the graphs, the first one is for financial year 2016, second one for 2017, and third 2018. So what we see is that sustainability reports continue to be the dominant location of climate-related financial disclosures. That said, preparers are increasingly including such information in their financial filings, i.e. their annual reports, and also in integrated reports. And we see this as a very positive trend. To ensure the availability of transparent, consistent, and decision-useful information, it's imperative that disclosures are made in the mainstream financial filings. And this is something that we at CDSB have been advocating for over a decade. What's most interesting about this is that when the task force asked respondents to identify why they were implementing the recommendations, the second most common reason cited was requests from investors for information, which leads us back to the mainstream report. As primary users of the financial report, this further demonstrates the need to integrate climate-related financial information into the annual report. However, the good news is that disclosure in the financial filings or annual reports is on the up according to the second status report. It's increased by almost 50% over the last 3 years compared to an increase of only about 30% in sustainability reports. Again, we see this as a positive finding. So what do these findings mean? If I now turn back to Mike, who will take us through a few thoughts on that.
Thank you, Nadine. Well, as Michael Bloomberg so succinctly put it, progress must be accelerated. Today's disclosures remain far from the scale the markets need to channel investment to sustainable and resilient solutions, opportunities, and business models. I believe the power of transparency to spur action on climate change through market forces. So there's no doubt that we need to accelerate the adoption of the TCFD recommendations globally, and unprecedented changes are needed to meet the goals, for example, of the Paris Agreement. Given the complex nature of climate change, companies need to consider the financial risks and the opportunities that climate change poses to their activities, strategy, and business. Similarly, investors need decision-useful information on how companies are prepared so that they can better understand their exposure to these risks and then allocate capital accordingly to support long-term and sustainable economic systems aligned with a 1.5-degree pathway. Nonetheless, the report finds that the majority of respondents, about 67%, do plan to complete the implementation of the TCFD recommendations in the next 2 or 3 years. So there is some hope there. However, there are issues in the implementation. In the following slides, we'll present some of the key challenges that the survey highlights, along with some of the commitments that the TCFD will make to address these and the resources that are out there to help overcome these challenges. So what do report preparers say? Here you can see some of these challenges that the report has identified. So there has been identification of a lack of standardized industry metrics. There have been concerns about revealing confidential business information, and more clarity and challenges in adopting scenario analysis, the big ticket item of the TCFD recommendations. However, the landscape isn't as bad as it might seem. If we go to the next slide, please. There are these challenges, but they shouldn't be seen as obstacles or barriers to implementation. In fact, the market has already identified most of the challenges and is actively working to support and enhance adoption of these recommendations with a whole range of initiatives and resources to help you on your journey. One such initiative to align industry metrics is the Corporate Reporting Dialogue's Better Alignment Project that aims to promote greater coherence, consistency, and comparability between corporate reporting framework standards and related requirements. And we are also a member of this dialogue. The slide here is just a small snapshot of all the resources and initiatives supporting the TCFD and adoption of its recommendations worldwide. These include the World Economic Forum's Climate Governance Principles, the recently updated EU guidelines for reporting climate-related information, the TCFD Implementation Guide developed by CDSB and SASB to meet market demand for some how-to guidance on how to disclose in line with the recommendations, and the TCFD Knowledge Hub, which is an online aggregator for publicly available resources, events, case studies relating to the TCFD, which we run on behalf of the TCFD. And we're very excited that we'll be launching some e-learning courses there in the near future. If we could move to the next slide, please. The task force is also committed to continued efforts to support the adoption and address some of these challenges, and will prepare another status report in September 2020. It is also considering work around clarifying some elements, developing guidance for scenario analysis in particular, and identifying some climate-related scenarios. So I'll hand back to Nadine quickly to round up this webinar.
Thank you, Mike. So if we could leave you with sort of one takeaway from the second status report, and it's a similar takeaway that we found in our TCFD implementation guide with SASB, is really don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So our advice on that is about getting started. Through our corporate engagement efforts in speaking with companies and investors, one clear theme has emerged. Companies need to get started on disclosing climate-related information aligned with the TCFD recommendations. And we see through the second status report that there is some progress, but more is needed. So no matter if you are taking a sophisticated approach to corporate reporting or just testing the waters, there are ample resources, which Mike has shown, widely available to help you improve and enhance the quality, usefulness, and consistency of your climate-related financial disclosures. Please bear in mind that the direction of travel is clear, and the move to mandatory, as suggested in the quote provided earlier by Governor Mark Carney, is highly likely. So why wait? Companies can and should start preparing now. And the second status report gives us all the evidence to support that conclusion. So now if I'll just turn to Leslie, and she will open up the question and answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you both to Nadine and Michael for that very informative presentation. As I mentioned, we are keen to keep this swift and short and let you all get back to your very important jobs. So we do have some time for questions. We've already had a few come through on the chat. So while everyone else is putting their questions in, I'll direct the first question, which is to Nadine. Nadine, could you tell us what the status report findings mean for TCFD report preparers?
Thank you, Leslie. Happy to. So I think the key message coming out of the status report is that we need more disclosures and we need them fast. And as I ended our presentation by saying about don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, I think it's really important that we start reporting. So we don't have time to aim for perfection, but we can ensure that we have good disclosures. And we recognize that there's a whole body of work in parallel also that needs to be done internally, including looking at alignment with existing processes, including governance and risk management. So one of the things that the second status report does is it recognizes that disclosure is a journey, and it recognizes that there will be a phased approach to TCFD implementation. And for those on the call that are interested in looking at some examples of what a phased approach to TCFD implementation might look like, I would refer you to the Commonwealth Bank of Australia's 2018 annual report or HSBC's 2018 annual report, which provides some good examples of how you can also capture some of that work you are doing internally when you may not feel comfortable to make the full disclosures across the 11 recommended disclosures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadine. Michael, we've had a question around developments that could speed up the implementation of the TCFD recommendations. Perhaps I could direct that question to you, and you could talk us through a little bit around the regulatory perspective.
Sure, happy to. So there are a whole host of voluntary initiatives, of course, work to support report preparers in adopting the TCFD recommendations, but it's important not to ignore the regulatory developments that are happening globally as well to speed up this process. Just last week, the UK government has launched its green finance strategy, where it has set an expectation for all listed companies to be reporting in line with the TCFD by 2020, so next year, very, very soon, and is also at the same time looking at whether there are any regulatory measures that it should be implementing. A few months ago, the Canadian government's expert panel on sustainable finance, which was a group of private sector actors tasked with by the government to assess ways to boost sustainable finance in Canada, have also recommended that Canada implements a comply or explain based TCFD requirement. We see the Australian Accounting Standards Board and the Australian Auditing and Assurance Standards Board providing guidance on the links of financial reporting standards and the materiality of climate change and how those could be addressed. New Zealand is also looking at the TCFD, and in Japan there is a government-led consortium of private sector actors working on implementing the TCFD recommendations. And last but not least, where I'm here in Europe, we have also the European Commission speaking quite openly and about the fact that they would not be surprised if the European Non-Financial Reporting Directive, which is a requirement to disclose such information, may be reopened by the new Commission in the next couple of years to see how it could be strengthened and evolved. So there are a lot of initiatives globally supporting the market to create these enabling conditions to speed up the implementation of the recommendations.
Thank you very much, Michael. We have time for just one more question. I would like to thank everyone for submitting their questions. We've had a whole host of them come through. We do encourage for you to contact us directly if you'd like to ask us any questions or like more information on the webinar. So for the last question of today, and Michael or Nadine, I'll direct it at either of you. What's the role of CDP in supporting the reporting of climate risks and opportunities in the mainstream report?
Thanks, Leslie. If I can start, on the resources slide, you will have seen that a few slides ago that Mike was covering, we included CDP on that slide, and really because CDP helps companies collect, report, and structure their data. So CDP has an instrumental role in terms of TCFD, and basically their questionnaires have been aligned to the TCFD last year, which means that all the content that's needed to report on the TCFD is available through the through CDP. At the same time, I would also just like to add that with SASB, which you've seen in the implementation guide, it also helps companies understand what is material to their organizations, and materiality is obviously a very important concept in considering what to include in the mainstream report. And then finally, CDSB is kind of like the final partner in that we help companies integrate this financially material information generated through, for example, through CDP or SASB and also others into the annual report.
Okay, thank you very much. We do have time for just one more question. So this one is around double materiality. Do you think it's likely that the TCFD will pick up double materiality as depicted in the non-binding guidelines of the EU Commission?
I can give this a go, if that's all right. Thank you for that excellent question. In Europe, we have, as I mentioned, we have the European Non-Financial Reporting Directive, which also has recently seen the launch of guidance on climate-related disclosures, especially sort of taking on the recommendations of the TCFD. And one of the interesting points of the guidance is that it really highlights this what's so-called double materiality approach applied by the non-financial reporting directives. So just to explain this very shortly, there are two elements to what needs to be disclosed. One is more around the impact of climate and other ESG matters on the business, and the other side of the coin is the impact of the company on the climate and then wider ESG issues. The TCFD itself focuses very much on the former, so what is the impact of climate change on my business, on my performance? But I think it's very important to note, and it's also noted in the non-binding guidelines, that even sort of more conventional ESG reporting content, the impact of the company on the environment, can have and often has had material financial impacts. So while the focus of the TCFD is very much on the impact of climate on the company, because it is aimed primarily at an investor audience, which is primarily informed by these financial or pre-financial concepts. The impact of a company on the climate can also result in these issues that can then become material for this audience. So it's an interesting approach, but I do believe that these sort of two sides of materiality are two sides of the same coin. So in some cases, this is purely a question of how to frame these issues in a way that it makes sense for the reader of the report, which is essentially the investor.
Thank you very much, Michael. And that brings the webinar to a close. Once again, I would like to thank our presenters, Nadine and Michael, and also to thank you for everyone who joined. We will circulate a copy of the recording after the webinar. CDSB also hosts webinars over a variety of topics, so we will include links if you would like to join up for upcoming webinars, one of them which is looking at the new guidelines from the EU Commission on climate-related reporting. We also do want to hear your thoughts. We welcome your feedback, and if there are any other topics or subjects that you think a webinar would be useful on, we would be more than happy to hear those suggestions from you and look at hosting it. As I say, we've had some fantastic questions come through, so please do drop us a line, and we'd love to discuss further with you. So thank you very much to everyone, and wishing you a pleasant day.